Okay, let's dive into this. We've literally all been there. You're standing in a completely new coffee shop, chatting with a friend, and suddenly, the whole universe just pauses. You get this intense, overwhelming wave of absolute certainty that you have lived this exact moment before. You know exactly what they're going to say, you know the smell of the room, and for 3 really uncomfortable seconds, you feel like a psychic time traveler. Well, welcome to our explainer on the hilarious and honestly slightly embarrassing science of déjà vu.
So let's just address the elephant in the room right off the bat. Are you a time traveler? When that weird feeling hits, do you genuinely think deep down that you possess some kind of dormant psychic abilities? Because, I know I do. I'm instantly like, wait, did I dream this? Have I access to past life? Is my superpower finally activating? We all have that tiny, stressed out part of our ego that desperately wants to believe we are somehow glitching the space time continuum and peering into the future.
Well, now, your brain just glitched. Reading through the research on this instantly burst my bubble, and actually, scratch that, it's definitely going to burst yours too. We are not time travelers. You are not Neo from the Matrix bending reality to your will. What we're actually experiencing is our biological autocorrect just aggressively misfiring. Our brains essentially trip over their own shoelaces and then desperately try to play it cool. So it's not magic. It's just a neurological glitch, and honestly, a pretty clunky one at that. But hey, if you're chronically online and questioning your sanity right now, you are definitely not alone. Roughly two-thirds, about 65% of healthy adults, experience this completely normal memory anomaly. That is a massive chunk of people. It's one of the most universally shared neurological hiccups we humans have. So no, you are not losing your mind. You're just part of the vast majority of us whose brains occasionally hit the wrong button. And this isn't some new phenomenon caused by us staring at our smartphones all day. This glitch is so universally confusing that people have been documenting it for centuries. Even Charles Dickens was writing about it way back in 1850. In his novel David Copperfield, he described having some experience of a feeling of what we are saying and doing having been said and done before. That eerie feeling of being surrounded, deemed ages ago, by the same faces and circumstances. So if Dickens felt it, I'd say we're in incredibly good company.
So, what exactly is happening up there in our heads? The research essentially defines déjà vu as your brain's fact-checking department taking an unapproved coffee break. Usually, when you experience something, your brain processes it and files it away nice and properly. But during déjà vu, the frontal regions of your brain, and you can kind of think of them as this exasperated manager trying to keep things orderly, suddenly you have to deal with a rogue signal claiming, hey, we've totally seen this before, even when there is absolutely no proof.
To really understand this mismatch, we need to meet two specific characters in your brain, the perirhinal cortex and the hippocampus. It's kind of like a movie where the audio and video tracks just go slightly out of sync. See, your perirhinal cortex is responsible for that vague feeling of familiarity. It's exactly like the guy in the office who prematurely hits reply all with absolute, completely unearned confidence. Meanwhile, the hippocampus is supposed to have the actual receipts, the specific episodic memories of exactly when and where something happened. So in déjà vu, the reply all guy fires off a highly confident familiarity signal, while the panicked hippocampus is frantically searching its filing cabinets going, wait, I have no file for this. Let's break down this hilarious slow-motion play-by-play, because the speed of this whole thing is just mind-blowing. This entire epic saga of you feeling like a time traveler, yeah, it happens in a fraction of a single second. In the first 80 milliseconds, raw sensory input arrives. Then, between 80 and 200 milliseconds, that overeager perirhinal cortex triggers a familiarity assessment. It confidently declares, oh, I know this. Then, right between 200 and 400 milliseconds, your hippocampus desperately searches for the matching memory and completely fails to find it. Finally, at around 400 to 600 milliseconds, your prefrontal cortex detects this massive conflict. It realizes you feel super familiar with a moment that has literally zero memory attached to it. And boom, that's exactly when you experience those 3 mind-bending seconds of déjà vu. Now, what's really interesting about this is how scientists have actually tested it in the lab. Cognitive tests show a stark difference between truly remembering an event with context versus just feeling that something is familiar. Researchers found they can literally induce this false sense of familiarity using visual cues and word lists, proving that our brain can strongly scream, I know this, even without a single shred of actual recollection. The familiarity signal is completely, 100% decoupled from the memory itself. Which brings us to a very logical and frankly exasperating question. Why? Why on earth would evolution, which spent millions of years fine-tuning this incredible biological supercomputer in our heads, code such a clunky system? Seriously, why are we wired to make ourselves feel completely stupid and confused for a few seconds while we're just, waiting in line at the grocery store?
Well, the answer lies in evolutionary trade-offs, specifically how our brains categorize errors. Just think about the difference between a type 1 error, a false positive. That's like feeling absolutely certain you've been in this exact Starbucks before when you definitely haven't. And then you have a type 2 error, a false negative. That would be like looking at a hungry tiger in the bushes and thinking, I don't recognize that as a threat. Evolution designed our brains with a very strict better safe than sorry policy. It is far, far better to occasionally have a harmless, slightly embarrassing false positive than to ever have a deadly false negative. And this brilliantly illustrates the concept of evolutionary mismatch. Scientists view our memory as a teleonomic system, which, is really just a fancy way of saying it's built with a very specific purpose, constantly and rapidly scanning the environment for matching patterns to keep us alive. But our modern environments are incredibly complex and full of overlapping stimuli, compared to the wild ancestral environments we actually evolved in. Because your brain is just constantly scanning for patterns to protect you, occasionally the whole system misfires. It flags a modern, perfectly harmless situation as deeply familiar just because it shares some vague structural overlap with something else. So it's a feature, really, not a bug. So who is most likely to suffer from all this hyperactive pattern matching? Well, the real culprits behind the glitch are pretty relatable. Déjà vu actually peaks between the ages of 15 and 25 because the brain is just buzzing with high neuroplasticity. It's young, overactive, and building connections everywhere. Throw in chronic stress and severe sleep debt, and you have the absolute perfect recipe for a misfire. Your brain gets exhausted, pattern separation gets sloppy, and boom, you get a false familiarity alert. So the real punchline here is, you aren't psychic. Your brain is just overactive, incredibly stressed out, and desperately running on like 3 hours of sleep. We've seen the literal milliseconds it takes to trick you, the brain regions that argue with each other like tired coworkers, and the evolutionary reasons why we're built this way. Which leaves us with a final thought for this explainer. Next time you're standing there, frozen, feeling like a time traveler whose past lives are suddenly colliding, will you just take a quick moment to thank your clunky, hilariously flawed brain? I mean, it's really just trying to keep you alive, one slightly embarrassing false positive at a time.